I've been using Redux Toolkit on a couple of recent projects, and if you're familiar with Redux, you know how powerful it is, but you also know that it comes with a few drawbacks. It requires you to be very verbose, so even adding simple things can take a lot of boilerplate and setup code. Redux Toolkit exposes a manageable set of APIs that remove the need to write a lot of that boilerplate and setup code. In this video, I wanted to share that with you, so we'll run through putting together a basic Redux Toolkit project. In future videos, we'll build it out so that we're fetching a paginated list of users from an API, but in this video, like I said, we're just getting started. Okay, first things first, let's initialize our project. So I'm going to use TypeScript here because I prefer having some semblance of a type system. It lets me know when I'm writing code that might produce runtime errors. Now, TypeScript has no runtime guarantees, so it's more of a linter, really, but having written a lot of Swift code over the years, it feels a lot more natural to me than plain old JavaScript. Now let's add our dependencies. We're going to add a few things. Most importantly, we're going to add Redux Toolkit. Redux Toolkit is a library that greatly simplifies the standard Redux APIs and allows us to achieve the same sort of robust state management without all of the boilerplate that using Redux normally entails. I'm sure many of you have written your fair share of Redux code in the past, and I think you'll be impressed with how much less code there is to write with Toolkit. So in addition to that, we'll also install some other things we need. We'll get React Redux, and we'll pull down the types for React Native and for Redux. This will just give us some handy type checking in our editor when we go to write code in a minute. Okay, great. So now let's install our pods, if there are any. And now we can run our app in the simulator. Resize this window a bit so we can see the simulator. Great. Okay, cool. And what we're seeing right here is just the default React Native UI that we'll clear out in a minute. So let's head over to VS Code and clear all this out so we have kind of a clean slate to start from. Can resize the window so that we can see the simulator while we're developing. Okay. So let's just clear everything inside the safe area view out initially and remove some of these unused imports. And this as well. Now, we essentially need three things to get started. We need a store to manage global app state. We need what's called a slice to manage app state for the screen we'll be building. And we also need a component to render the UI. Let's start with the store. We'll create a file called store.ts. Here, we'll combine all of the reducers specified by our individual slices and expose them back to us as the global app state. We'll create a root reducer first. Okay, cool. So what we're doing here is combining all of the reducers specified by our individual slices, and we're exposing them back to us as the global app state. You'll notice that we're not passing in any reducers just yet, but that's our next step. So let's create our first slice that will export a reducer that we can pass into the store. We'll create a file called user list slice. And in that file, we'll create our slice. But first we'll need a couple of types. I think ultimately we'll want a user type because we'll be fetching users from the API and we'll want to serialize them into objects that we can work with. And using that, we'll define a state type for this slice. And this will be the state that represents the data that the screen needs to render. So we'll have a collection of users, we'll have a loading state, also maybe an error state in case the API returns a 404 or another error code. And using these two types, we can define an initial state for our screen and for our slice. So initially the user's collection is going to be empty. There's going to be no error and we're not going to be loading. Great, so now we have everything we need to actually create our slice. So we'll define a const here and give it a name. We'll also pass in the initial state that we just defined, and we'll have a set of reducers that is initially going to be empty. And we'll export the slice's reducers to the rest of the app. So now we have a reducer that we can import into our store. Let's do that now. Now we've actually got everything we really need to go ahead and use our app state to drive our UI. So let's create our first component. We'll create a file called userlist.tsx, and here we'll create a function component. Now we can access the state that we need by grabbing it from the global app state. We'll use the useSelector hook from Redux to grab the state that we need from the global state here. And what I think I'd like to do is render 3 different UIs depending on the state that the screen is in. So if the screen is loading, we'll render one UI. If the screen is in the error state, we'll render a different UI. And if the screen is neither in the loading or error state, we'll render a default state. So to do that, we'll just grab the state from the screen state that we just defined and conditionally render different stuff down here. So if screen state is loading, I want to render just some loading text here. And similarly, I'll do the same for error. Screen state.error here. And then if the screen state is neither loading nor error, cool. And looks like we'll have to import text from React Native. Let's make sure these strings are saying the right thing. So error here, and let's just say default over here. To see this in action, let's import our component in app.js. Oops, so to make this work properly, we'll have to wrap our component in a provider that exposes the global app state to its children through the store. So let's import provider, as Redux provider from React Redux. And let's wrap our component in that. And let's make sure to pass in the store. Looks like we have to import the store. Awesome, so now we're seeing the default state that we'll expect to see. And if we head over to our user slice, we can modify the initial state and we'll see loading now. And if we set error to true, as you might expect, we'll see the text error. Awesome. Well, I hope after watching this video you feel good about Redux Toolkit. Let me know what you think in the comments, and I'll see you in the next video where we'll return to build this app out a little bit further.